Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage in the somewhat steamy state of Maine. Over the last weekend, it was sunny and about 95 degrees and humid. Not my favorite type of weather. Let's just say I'm not a fan, but I was in front of the fan as often as I could, or in the shade, or in the water. So Saturday it was almost too hot for boating, believe it or not. I can't imagine living down south or out west. I guess they claim out west is a drier heat. I don't know that I'll ever know on a long-term basis anyway. I do go to Florida in the wintertime, and I'm okay if I'm down there wearing a sweatshirt and everybody says they're freezing to death. So why are we here today? We're here to talk about, and I've talked about it in the past, the 480E direct drum. The conversion into a Turbo 400. The 480E drum, I wouldn't say it's superior, but it's more available, and it comes with everything that you're looking for. There are Turbo 400s that existed that I have one. I should get it, but I don't have it here, and cleaned the handle and show you. If I put it next to this one, it would be hard to tell which is which. I'd like to tell you that every 480E drum has a wider band right here, but if I've learned nothing, then nothing is absolute. So the majority of the ones that I find have a wider band right there, where a Turbo 400 direct drum has a thinner band. Some Turbo 400 drums, the snap ring groove for the pressure plate for the clutch pack is lower, which is going to make it difficult to get more than 5 clutches in it. So in either case, if you want at least 5 clutches and steels, if not more, you're going to need the higher snap ring. So when you put them next to each other, it becomes apparent that one is higher. So that's a feature that the 480E drum has automatically. Now I got to quote they say 97 and in 1997 they made some changes to the 480E drum. They say that from 97 and up, they all had a 34 element intermediate Sprag, which is what we're looking for. They all had 97 and up a spiral lock instead of a regular snap ring to hold the shield on, which ultimately holds the outer Sprag race on. Spiral lock is a superior piece, and it is a direct retrofit to any Turbo 400 drum. So even if you're not upgrading the drum, it's an excellent upgrade. While we're on the back, a hidden feature that I find very important, and the reason I went to the shelf today looking for a 480E drum, which fortunately I had 3 left, is the intermediate Sprag race is about 45 thousandths wider than a stock Turbo 400. This is about 745 to 755, depending on how you measure it. And GM lists this, and I just measured it at 795 thousandths wide. I know you can put the 480E 4-clutch intermediate pack in a Turbo 400 with the Turbo 400 thinner outer Sprag race, and it'll work. But I don't know at what point, let's say the clutches start to wear and one of them could drop off the splines, eventually having a no apply, or it's going to destroy that clutch and the one next to it. Everything's going to get all bent up. It's going to be a mess. The piston will probably over travel, spit the seals out. It'll probably rear its ugly head. There's a reason why GM went ahead and made it a little bit wider. So that is why when I convert to the 480E intermediate clutch pack, which is what I stock mostly for intermediate clutches for a Turbo 400, I buy the 480E stuff and the 480E intermediate pressure plate. This is a direct clutch pressure plate, but the 480E intermediate pressure plate is thinner, allowing you more clutches and steels with basically no modifications. Sometimes I have to add a stock thickness 1 Turbo 400 steel in the intermediate clutch pack to adjust my clearance, but It's related to the direct drum, so I don't want to go on a tangent about the intermediate clutch pack setup, but I don't want my clutch splines falling off the intermediate Sprag race where they grab. So that's why I went with that today. Other features and things to look for, 1997 and up, they went to a molded apply piston. The seals are molded into the piston. It's a pretty nice piece. And a caged spring setup, which fits right on there. And if you're building a street transmission, I save these when I buy the 480E drums refurbished. They come with this that I hope is new. It claims it is. If you're building a street transmission where you don't have heavier return springs, which come with trans brakes and whatnot, this is an awesome option. To, you know, it's not retrofit, it's backfitting, I guess, into a Turbo 400. But for this application with a trans brake, I need a good old Turbo 400 piston. In this case, I have a check ball in the 480E drum, which they all did, I believe, because the molded piston has no provision for a check ball. Therefore, the drum has one. So I need a non-check ball piston, or I need to plug the check ball in the piston if I care, or I could run 2 check balls, but I never do, to be honest. I usually run 1. And you can machine at will. Right here, in this case, I'm going for 6 clutches. So this needs to be approximately 600 thousandths. If I was cutting it, for this particular setup, I've already dry fitted. I just take the piston, set it in the drum, and I stack clutches and steels until I'm happy with the clearance. I have, you know, boxes of direct steels, which are thicker than the forward steels. Every other part, they're identical and they interchange. So that's an easy way to set my clearance without cutting any more off the piston, and you'd have to cut a lot to get to the point where the first steel could rotate in the drum under the splines, but it's something to watch for also. So by doing it this way, I'm avoiding cutting the piston more, and my piston is certainly in a safe range. So in this case, I had 3 direct steels, 3 forward steels, and my clearance was perfect. I could have just, you know, cut 15 thousandths off this piston and done the same thing, but I can't see any advantage to doing that. And again, you got to outweigh, you know, advantages and disadvantages. In this case, it's easy. I just use my steels to set my final clearance. I'm within 15 to 20 thousandths, and the steels make it just fine. And you're going to need Turbo 400 lip seals for the piston. They retrofit right into the 480E drum. No conversion, and of course I'm going to leave this one out, the drum seal, because I'm dual feeding the direct clutches. The bleed hole. This is kind of a cool trick. In other videos, and for years, I'd be relatively successful, but you're supposed to drill the bleed hole. The bleed hole is to allow, in a trans brake application, I believe it helps the oil just to dissipate, squirt out faster when it releases. And for high RPMs, they claim the oil caught up inside will slightly apply the clutches and burn them up. So the bleed hole is a good modification in any Turbo 400. And I would, you know, take my cordless drill and drill at an angle, and, you know, 3 out of 4 times I wouldn't break the drill bit. Often I would. So a buddy of mine, who's not wrong in this, he says, why don't you just drill from the other side? Well, if I drill from the other side, it's going to be straight in, obviously. And then you have to guess at the way you're going to mark it that you miss the inner wall correctly. So through trial and error, I'm going to share it with you. And if you can remember 442, like the Oldsmobile, I take my caliper using this end, and I just measure in from the side of the drum, 442 thousandths, prick punch it, and I drill down straight through. And I don't know if you can see it, but that is absolutely textbook. I'm right in the curve of the drum. I'm not in the seal area, but I'm as far out as possible, which, you know, centrifugally, that's where you want to be. if you want oil to come out, you want to be as far out. If I drilled halfway across the void here, well, oil's still going to get caught up the top. So that's the reason why you want to be as close to the curve, but not on the sealing portion of the drum to accomplish that. Whoops, I gotta shut you off for a second. My clicker got mad at me because I just talked for 10.5 minutes straight. If I ever meet you in real life, I'm never gonna talk for 10.5 minutes straight. Before YouTube, I never did. My first video, I've laughed about it. I talked for 28 minutes straight. It is the worst video I've ever done. It was my first one. So back to the 4L80E direct drum. A couple of clues I find. There's a ring machined into just a support piece of the pressure plate for the clutches, telling me that came from a 4L80E. I don't ever see this on a Turbo 400 that I remember. Again, I don't believe anything's absolute. There's 2 rings, and that's the way GM lists it. There's a 2-ring intermediate Sprag race, 795 thousandths. So these 2 rings cast in here with a Turbo 400 one will either have nothing or 1. So if you see 2 rings, I'd go ahead and measure, but it should be the thick one that you're looking for if you want to safely have 4 intermediate clutches. The sealing surface, where it rides on the center support, 4L80Es had Teflon seals. So you're very seldom going to find wear in here, where the Turbo 400s, the old ones that had steel sealing rings, often have a groove there. So I find these to, again, nothing's 100%, but most of the time, it's going to look pretty nice in there. When you convert to the Turbo 400 piston in your 4L80E direct drum, the last item you're going to need is any Turbo 400 direct drum clutch retainer and snap ring. The snap ring is the same on either style spring retainer, but that's a direct bolt-in. They make these at a Super Duty as well, or at least they're gold plated and they look nice. But even with the heavy return springs that come in the trans brake, it's not a fail item. So at least on a regular basis, I've seen some people retrofit the heavy springs into one of these cages and then still run the molded piston. I've never done that. Not saying it's impossible, but the molded piston has me locked in dimensionally. I'm going to have some trouble finding what I consider the ideal clutch clearance, which, if you're asking, the rule of thumb is 10 thousandths a clutch, so that would be 60 thousandths in this drum. In reality, I got about 45. Because I know they're going to break in, and I don't know when that 60 thousandths is supposed to be measured. If I'm supposed to take it apart after you break it in, or is that with brand new clutches, is that with used clutches? There's a lot of, interpretation there. So I seldom start at what the ideal limit is allegedly supposed to be. So about 45 thousandths for this clutch pack. And history tells me that that's going to work out just fine. The snap ring that holds the pressure plate in for your clutches appear to be all the same. I measured a bunch of them one day to see what I had, and they all measured the same, so I'm going to go ahead and assume they're all the same. Again, not an issue. Not something you have to update, change, or worry about. Just find yourself a Turbo 400 or 4L80E snap ring and go ahead and put it in. In the past, I've told you when I installed the direct drum in the transmission, I'm just grabbing onto this. I've already set up my clutches and steels and then taking them back out. And I just put this in, grab onto it, and install it that way because this is already in with my piston and springs. So I'm just grabbing this because the direct drum with the pressure plate installed, there's no room to get your hands on the outside to get it in the case, and there's nothing to grab on the inside. So another good trick that works well, I don't have one right here, but oftentimes I'll just put the forward pressure plate, which has the big spline piece sticking out. It makes a nice handle. And I'll just leave my snap ring hanging out slightly so it's holding onto it. But I use that, to lower the direct drum in and wiggle it into place. Then I just pop the snap ring out and swap in the correct pressure plate that doesn't have the big spline piece like the forward one does. Yeah, I don't have one right here, but you know what they look like, don't you? Of course you do. So, I think I've covered everything that I could possibly say about the 4L80E drum conversion into a Turbo 400. It's a pretty popular question I get, and I've covered it in the past, but that is every reason I can think of to use one. If you're building, I'm not sure at what horsepower level and weight is comfortable with you, but it's a lot. Where you should be like 36 element Sprag and an aluminum drum. And now the Sonex has a super cool drum module, they call it, that stops the direct drum from counter rotating, which is usually its demise if it's going to explode. It'll counter rotate about 2.5 times drive shaft RPM. So anyway, I hope you got something out of this. I hope I didn't ramble too much. Wake up. The video's over. Exit to the left side. Follow the courtesy lights. Hey, have a nice evening. Talk to you soon.